Hello everyone, this is Mona from Cookie Flicks. Today we have a 12 plus cookie set, and there are lots of stencils in this one too that you'll receive if you're on a tier 3 Patreon level. I think there's 9 stencils that you'll receive, so check it all out. Ask any questions in the comments that you have of me, and I will answer all questions. If you have anything that you'd like to see me make in the future, put that in the comments also. I like to do what you want to learn. Thanks for joining, and we'll get started. First, we'll start with the stencils. We're going to make stencil transfers or stencil sprinkles, if you will. They're kind of big for sprinkles, but they are nice. Start by putting parchment paper down, and then make sure that you have some really thick royal icing. You want to put some extra powdered sugar in it to make it super thick. And we're going to stencil these really thick too, like where you would normally stencil just a small coating. We're going to try to make our coating extra thick. If you get it on the thin side, your shapes will break a lot easier. Some's going to break anyway, and that's okay, because since this is a beach scene, if they're broken, they're going to be mixed in sand, in some of your cakes or cookies that you make. And there we have mermaid tails. And just set these aside. I usually let them dry the whole night. I make them the night before that I need them. And this is going to be seashells and starfish. Now you can also use these to put directly on a cookie, depending on what your design is. And then you can also airbrush with these on your cookies. And these have many different sizes. I made large, medium, and small of every design. And this is the sand dollar. This one is just a seashell. It has different sizes. And this is the larger of the starfish and shells. Once they dry, you can put them in a paper plate. They last for a long time, so you can put them in some sort of a container with a lid too, if you plan on using more in beach scenes. And they usually just slide right off of the parchment. The cutters for the cookies that you'll see in all of these videos came from Michael's. They are just a plaque set, and I think there's 3 or 4 different shapes. But you'll find on the Patreon site, if you're a member, that there are templates there for these shapes. If you don't have these cutters, you can want to freehand. I have put the template to that. Now we're going to do our watercolor painting. This is just gel paints, Americolor, and I put them on a, you can use a paper plate. I have a little artist easel thing. And then you just dip your brush in water and then in the color and wipe it off. You don't want your brush too wet or that will melt the frosting. And then the sand is just royal icing. I just colored it with the Wilton brown and I made it a light color. And I'm just going to stipple it on. Now you can also, if you don't like this look, you can add a gold or brown sanding sugar to your icing on top, or even brown sugar, but just put a thinner layer of frosting if you're going to do it that way. And another way that you can do, that I have done before, is I do save cookies that break, or the ugly cookies. We call them Scooby snacks in our home. The grandkids love the Scooby snacks. But you can save those, and I keep them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. And if I need some beach sand, I can take those cookies and put them in my food processor and grind them up, and that makes perfect sand. And then also what looks really good is if you take a couple of these shells too and toss them in there at the very end so they're kind of big, or just break them up after you're done and you have bits of shell sticking out of your sand. I didn't have any spare cookies this time though. I got wiped out by the Cookie Monsters. And now I'm just placing the shells on the wet icing. And now we'll make some waves, foaming waves. If you're familiar with brush embroidery, that's what we're going to use here. Just use a wet brush and brush it out. And now if you would like to add to your starfish, you can pipe on top of any of these stencils. I like to do the starfish. You can even do the sand dollar by putting some little loops, but I just really wanted to do the starfish on these. And then I'm going to add just a simple bead border. There you have it. Somehow I did not film the painting process on this cookie, but it's the same as the last cookie. On this cookie, we'll do cross stitching with the cake lace, and I will put a link in the description to the video on how to make this particular cake lace. It's very easy. And this is pieces that I had left over from the last video, if you watched that one. And I'm just going to cut my lace the size of the cookie and the size of my design. And notice how I'm counting all the little squares. And I have a template that shows you the squares that you will also find on the Patreon site. If you're a member of my Patreon group, you get that free for download also. I prefer the little tiny sewing scissors. Those cut this type of thing better than the large scissors. And remember, any pieces you have left, put them in a bag and seal it up so it doesn't dry. They will last a long time and they'll stay flexible and soft as long as you have it sealed. And now I'm just going to apply it to the cookie with water. Don't get too much. If you do, wipe it off with a paper towel. And then I'll trim the excess. And then just take a paintbrush dipped in water and kind of tap those sides down and they'll stick. And it's all set. Just let it dry about 5 or 10 minutes before you get started on it. And here is your pattern. I have put yellow highlighted lines so that you can center it up with your cookie in the center. And here I go. I'm putting the dots on. As I dot on the cookie, each line that I do, I will mark off with a highlighter on my sheet so that, as you see there, I'm marking it off so that I don't do those again. It can get confusing if you don't mark those off, so you can see what you've already done and what you still need to do. On this cookie, I'm going to put a surfboard on here. Surfboards are really easy to draw. And I want it to be shiny, so I'll put it in the food dehydrator for a few minutes so it will crust over a shiny white. And then I want a fence, and I want just a homemade looking fence with wire. So I'm just going to put lines. And then I use my food safe marker and I'll draw my wires. And then here I took a little darker brown than the sand and just making some bushes. So here's a tip that I use in the classes that I teach at the college in cake decorating. I also use this in my cookie decorating. And I take cornstarch and I take a knee-high pantyhose, preferably white. You can use any color that you want, but I just like white. It seems like they are a little thicker. But I use the cornstarch to roll fondant and roll modeling clay or modeling chocolate. And this is how I put the cornstarch in the pantyhose and get it pretty full because I don't want to have to make another one very soon. And these are disposable. Once the cornstarch is almost gone or gone, just throw it away and grab another pantyhose. Because I think at the dollar store you can get 5 pairs for like $1. Okay, so I'm going to tie a knot in it and I'm going to wrap it around again so that it makes it double thick and tie another knot. And there you have it. You just kind of like, it's a pad now, pouch, and you just, tap it on the table. And here I'll use it with my rolling of this modeling chocolate too. And I'm going to make shells. I have a cutter that has a veiner built in, and I want a little bit of pink to my shells, so I want to kind of marble it in. And here's the star of the show. This will be a lighthouse. And lighthouses are pretty cool. I plan on doing a whole series of those in the near future. I did start working on designings this week. You'll also find this template on the Patreon website also for you to download for free if you're a Patreon member. Now first I'd like to draw where my rocks will be. We're going to have this lighthouse sitting right on top of a rock mountain. Now I'll draw my lighthouse onto the cookie. And this is also a food safe marker from Americolor. First I'll outline and flood the lighthouse. And once this is flooded, I will put it in a food dehydrator for about 10 minutes so that it can crust into a shiny lighthouse. It's easier to paint on a cookie if the frosting is shiny. And I want it kind of fluffy, so I put a lot of frosting. Want to really give it that 3D effect. And now we'll paint the sky. The same watercolor effect as on the other cookies. Now I'm picking up some of that color by just dipping my brush in water and wiping it off, and then wiping it off the cookie. And then that's how you can decide how much paint that you want on your cookie. If you get too much, you can always take it off. And here I want it to look like lights shining from the lighthouse. So I'm just putting white, Americolor bright white, and just painting straight lines. Now for the rocks. I have frosting that was made the night before, and I did just let it set in the bag and develop bubbles and get thicker. And I didn't stir it or anything because I want it to have a really rough effect like rocks. You can even put that on with a spoon if you want. You don't necessarily have to do it in a bag. And then a couple of different times I'm going to let it just kind of crust for a few minutes, and then go back over it again with a paintbrush, and to give it some, more crackled effects in the rocks. And here I'm using my Dresden tool, kind of break it up a little bit after it crusted. And because the frosting is so thick on here, it will need to dry overnight before you can start your painting. And I'll place a couple of lines on the lighthouse to separate the sections. Okay, and I have black, white, and gray, and I made some gray with the black and white. And the gray is for the rocks, and then of course I have my cup of water and my paper towel. And I'm just going to start stippling on the gray. Now we'll put a little bit of black in some of the crevices, and then we'll blend that out. Now we'll put our red stripes on, and I'm using just a flat brush. And I have a brush that is about as wide as I want my stripes to be. And I load up enough paint so that I can go all the way across, and then I will go back and make the edges smooth. thinner stripe for the top. So this brush is a flat brush, but a little smaller than the first one. And now I have a fine paintbrush. We're going to put black border around everything. I'll show you how to make a micro piping bag. You want just a thin rope border, but just a tiny one, and it's really hard sometimes to get that unless you use a 0 or a 00 or a 000 tip. And I hate using tips. I like my bags to be tipless, so it's hard to cut a tip small enough unless you have just a little tiny amount in there. For whatever reason, a bag full of frosting just won't hardly micro pipe. And there you have it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this series, and there is many more to come. And being that it's summer now, I'll have more beach series coming up soon.